President Lee Jae-myung met with the leaders of both the ruling and main opposition parties on Tuesday, urging unity among them to protect the people's livelihoods as uncertainties deepen amid the Middle East crisis. The clock is ticking toward U.S. President Donald Trump's deadline for Iran to sign the deal and reopen the Strait of Hormuz, or face the threats of massive military action. Riding a semiconductor boom, Samsung Electronics has posted the highest quarterly earnings in Korean corporate history, with the first quarter operating profit hitting $33 billion, surpassing its entire annual earnings from last year and delivering an unprecedented earnings surprise. We begin with the war deadline set by U.S. President Donald Trump. Washington is set to take out Tehran if Iran decides not agree to a deal within the next 12 hours. For more details, we have our Park Kwon-woo on the line. Kwon-woo, tell us more.
Yes, Donald Trump has issued a starry ultimatum to Iran, setting a final deadline with less than a day now remaining. Trump warned that unless Iran reopens the Strait of Hormuz and agrees to a deal acceptable to Washington, the U.S. will carry out large-scale strikes on key infrastructure.
But we're giving them till tomorrow, 8 o'clock Eastern Time, and after that, they're going to have no bridges, they're going to have no power plants.
Trump also stressed this would be the final warning. And Iran has rejected a U.S.-backed 45-day temporary ceasefire proposal, instead calling for a permanent end to the conflict. According to Iranian state media, Tehran submitted a 10-point response via Pakistan, demanding safe passage through the Strait of Hormuz, post-war reconstruction, and the lifting of international sanctions. Iran dismissed U.S. threats as baseless, vowing to continue its attacks.
The rude rhetoric, arrogance and baseless threats of the delusional U.S. president arising from the deadlock he faces and aimed at justifying the repeated defeats of the U.S. military will have no effect on the continuation of offensive and crushing operations by the fighters of Islam against U.S. and Israeli enemies.
An Iranian president himself has said on Tuesday that more than 14 million Iranians have declared their readiness to sacrifice their lives to defend the country. In a post on X, he added that he has always been and will continue to be willing to make sacrifices for Iran. And Iran's Deputy Minister of Youth and Sports also called on young people to form a human chain around the country's power plants following Trump's threats.
But Kanu, attacks from both sides are continuing as the deadline looms. Tell us more.
Yes, so Israel says it has carried out strikes on 3 air bases in Tehran, targeting several Iranian aircraft and helicopters. It also claimed to have hit Iran's largest petrochemical complex linked to the South Pars gas field, a key energy hub for the country. And Israel has warned civilians to avoid using trains, saying their lives could be at risk ahead of the deadline. The Israeli military cautioned that railways in nearby areas may become targets, urging people to stay away for their own safety. Iran's attacks also continued as Saudi Arabia says it came under Iranian attack on Monday night. Its defense ministry reported intercepting 7 ballistic missiles, according to a statement posted on X. Riyadh added that debris from the interceptions fell near energy facilities, and the authorities are currently assessing potential damage. And that's all I have for you now. Back to you, Demi.
All right, Kanu, thanks for the report. Now, back here in Seoul today, President Lee Jae-myung hosted the leaders of the nation's 2 main political parties, calling for a unity at a difficult time. Our correspondent Yoon Jung-min reports.
The three-way meeting began with handshakes. President Lee Jae-myung, wearing a tie representing unity, called for across-the-aisle cooperation as he hosted the leaders of the nation's 2 main political parties over lunch, stressing the importance of communication.
우리 공동체가 위기에 처해 있을 때는 내부적 단합이 정말로 중요합니다. 우리가 통상적으로 얘기하는 것처럼 통합이라고 하는 것이 정말 이럴 때 빛을 발하지 않을까 싶습니다.
Higher living costs topped Tuesday's meeting as the country navigates the fallout from the war in the Middle East. Yi said he expects dialogue and coordination across the aisle for the war response supplementary budget worth 26 trillion won or $17 billion, which includes cash assistance for the bottom 70% of the income bracket.
근데 이런 거는 뭐 현찰 나눠주기라고 하는 것은 좀 과한 표현이라는 생각이 들어요. 지금 유류대 인상 또 그로 인해 파생되는 물가 상승이 워낙 크기 때문에 그로 인한 고통을 조금이라도 우리가 보전해 드려야 된다는 생각을 가지고 있습니다.
As the president reiterated that the government's extra budget was organized with surplus tax revenues, the ruling Democratic Party leader Chung Cheong-nae asked for support for its swift approval.
We should not miss this critical point for people's livelihoods. If it gets delayed, the damage will be greater. I have repeatedly promised to pass the extra budget as quickly as possible. I ask for cooperation from the opposition.
But the main opposition People Power Party leader Chang Dong-hyuk disagreed with certain spending plans.
Our party plans to cut unnecessary and inadequate spending. Instead, we have proposed 7 items that are seen as essential for people to survive. I hope these are reflected in the budget. I believe that will be the start of cooperation.
Chang was also critical of the government's policies in a host of areas, ranging from the economy, real estate to foreign policy, and asked that the president change his course of state affairs.
다소 불편한 말씀을 길게 드렸지만 들어주셔서 감사합니다.
전혀 안 불편합니다.
The meeting took place at a time when politicians are standing apart on certain issues, such as a special probe into what the DP calls politically motivated indictments under the previous conservative administration. The three-way meeting was the first of its kind in about 7 months, as a scheduled lunch meeting in February was abruptly canceled as the PPP leader protested the DP-led judicial reform laws. Yoon Jung-min, Arirang News.
Now, debate on a supplementary budget aimed at cushioning South Korea's economy from Middle East-driven instability is underway at the National Assembly. The Special Committee on Budget and Accounts convened Tuesday for the first of a 2-day policy questioning session on the bill, which is worth roughly 26.2 trillion Korean won, or more than $17 billion, and covers measures ranging from high oil price relief to supply chain stabilization. The ruling Democratic Party called the package urgently necessary, saying now is the crucial time to act, while the main opposition People Power Party pushed back, dismissing parts of the bill as vote vying ahead of June's local elections. Budget Minister Park Hong-gun urged the lawmakers to move swiftly, warning that delays would only worsen the damage, with a subcommittee review set for Thursday and a full floor vote scheduled for Friday. In the meantime, South Korea is ramping up efforts to brace for a prolonged Middle East energy crunch, with the President's Chief of Staff set to visit 3 countries to secure additional crude and naphtha supplies. Song Yoo-jin has more.
Presidential Chief of Staff Kang Won-sik has begun his trip to 3 major energy producers as President Lee Jae-myung's special envoy for strategic economic cooperation.
As Special Envoy for Strategic Economic Cooperation, I will be visiting Kazakhstan, Oman, and Saudi Arabia starting Tuesday evening, together with officials from relevant ministries and domestic energy firms, for further talks on securing additional supplies of crude oil and naphtha.
Speaking to reporters ahead of his departure on Tuesday, Kang said the mission is to prepare for what the Blue House now sees as a longer period of energy instability. He says the risk of disruption is not imminent, as South Korea has already secured crude oil volumes equivalent to 59% of last April's imports and 69% of May's. But the problem is that South Korea remains heavily dependent on shipments that pass through the now virtually closed Strait of Hormuz.
Last year, 61% of our crude oil imports and 54% of naphtha imports passed through the Strait of Hormuz. Given the structure of our economy, we urgently need measures to secure alternative supply lines until the situation in the Middle East is fully resolved.
Even if more reaches the market, prices remain significantly higher than before the war. Kang acknowledged that a quick end to the conflict would still be unlikely to bring energy prices down right away. He added that the government's supplementary budget bill, currently under review at the National Assembly, includes subsidies for crude oil and naphtha suppliers to prevent even higher costs being passed on to consumers. For now, however, the top priority is boosting physical supply. Eyes are on what tangible outcomes Kang's trip will deliver this time, as his visit to the UAE last month led to a deal to import 24 million barrels of crude oil. 송유진, Arirang News.
Fierce political battles continued at South Korea's National Assembly throughout the first 2 days of government questioning sessions, which is centered on the Middle East impact on the economy, politics, and other various aspects. Now, heated debates between the main and opposition parties were also seen as they questioned government officials on key items. For more, we turn to our correspondent, An Seong-jin. Welcome back, Seong-jin.
Thanks for having me, Dami.
So, Seong-jin, like I said, the first day focused on national security, politics, unification. What were some of the key points discussed?
Right, so the first day, which especially stressed the government's diplomatic role and multilateral efforts amid the Middle East conflict, emphasized the government's efforts in maintaining crude oil supply and clarified that it has not engaged in any discussions regarding the potential toll fields to be able to pass through the Strait of Hormuz. Now, it mostly discussed the government's proposed supplementary budget drafted in response to the ongoing conflict in the Middle East. Now, this plan proposes spending around 26.2 trillion Korean won, or 17.4 billion US dollars, to alleviate the impact on the public, SMEs, and businesses in general. The ruling Democratic Party continues to highlight the Lee Jae-myung administration's pragmatic diplomacy and efforts for economic stability.
In situations of conflict like this one, it is necessary to institutionalize prior consultations or joint impact assessments when relocating U.S. forces Korea for the Korea-U.S. alliance.
Both countries must continue to communicate closely to sustain a strong and healthy Korea-U.S. alliance.
Now, on the other hand, the main opposition People Power Party criticized the government's handling of the Middle East situation while opposing the extra budget proposal as excessive spending and calling for cuts. One lawmaker questioned South Korea's stance on the Middle East.
Shouldn't our country also formally state its position of rejecting a war of aggression in relation to the Iran conflict?
Whether the conflict constitutes a violation of international law or a war of aggression is still undetermined. We are taking our position carefully.
So the first day was focusing on South Korea's diplomatic efforts, and the second day, like you said, was focused on the economy and energy supply. Tell us more about the second day, Seong-jin.
Right, so just as you mentioned, the second day, which just took place yesterday, emphasized the country's energy stability. The ruling Democratic Party continued to stress its efforts on examining broader measures tied to energy security and the economy by expanding shipping routes, including passage through the Red Sea, and diversifying supply sources and regions. It added that the situation has accelerated a transition toward renewable energy to reduce structural reliance on fossil fuels.
Could instability in naphtha supply lead to a situation in which our industries are forced to halt operations?
We are carefully monitoring to ensure that these industries are not affected.
Now, similar, the main opposition People Power Party once again argued that key components of the budget proposal, such as subsidies to offset high energy prices and funding for renewable energy projects, are mere cash handouts for electoral purposes.
There are growing concerns that with liquidity already on the rise, pushing through an additional supplementary budget could further expand money supply and put pressure on the exchange rate.
Liquidity is one of several factors affecting the exchange rate and should not be overlooked, but we will conduct further analysis for its correlation.
Now, Seong-jin, we still have one more day of a government questioning session left. How is that looking to unfold?
Right, so right before that, we have a plenary session set for this Friday and a vote to the supplementary budget. Now, and just as you mentioned, right after that, next Monday, we will see the third and last day of questioning governing officials, which will take place, so we will have to keep an eye on what other discussions will be involved in.
We'll have to keep an eye on for certain. Seongjin, thanks for coming in tonight.
My pleasure as always, Tami.
With gasoline prices surging to record highs across the country, authorities will tighten the current 5-day rotation scheme into a 2-tier system starting Wednesday. Cha Yun-kyung has more.
The average price of gasoline in Seoul has surpassed 2,000 won, or $1.32 per liter, due to the effects of the ongoing war in the Middle East. According to OPNet, a fuel price monitoring system operated by the state-run Korea National Oil Corporation, the average stood at 2,001.54 won per liter as of 2:30 p.m. Tuesday, up 11.151 from the previous day. It's the first time in 3 years and 8 months that the per-liter price has exceeded 2,000 won when prices surged due to the Russia-Ukraine war. Nationwide, the average price has risen 8.54 won per liter, standing at 1,966.91 won. The South Korean government will implement a 5-day rotation system at public parking lots starting Wednesday. Entry is restricted on one day of the week based on the last digit of a car's license plate number, but it does not apply on weekends and public holidays. This is in line with government guidance following the issuance of a resource security crisis alert at level 3, or orange, the second highest level in its 4-tier system, as global supply disruptions continue. Public institutions that were already adopting the 5-day rotation system will be tightened further. Cars with odd number plates will be allowed to operate on odd number dates, while even number plates will run on even number dates. Electric and hydrogen-powered vehicles will be excluded, along with vehicles carrying people with disabilities or pregnant women. Violations will be subject to a 3-strike rule, with disciplinary action imposed after 3 or more violations. Cha Yun-kyung, Arirang News.
In the meantime, the Middle East conflict is weighing on South Korea's economy, with signs of recovery overshadowed by rising oil prices and global supply chain risks. Yun-jin has more.
South Korea's economy had been showing a trend of modest recovery until it was disrupted by the ongoing Middle East war and now faces increased downside risks. This was the assessment by the Korea Development Institute in its April publication. The KDI's analysis suggests that as soaring international oil prices and supply chain instability persist, negative impacts on inflation, consumption, investment, and exports across the board could intensify. The state-run think tank first mentioned the possibility of downward economic risks from the geopolitical crisis 1 month ago and is now issuing a more explicit warning, saying the risks are expanding. Domestic demand is currently improving modestly, while exports maintain a high growth rate on the back of strong demand for semiconductors. Average retail sales for January and February increased by 2.7% compared to the same period last year, recording a higher growth rate than in December of last year, which was at 1.2%. Service industry production also increased by 3.3% during the same period. Facility investment rose by 9.3% in January and February on average, bolstered by strong investment in semiconductors. And while construction investment remains sluggish, the decline showed signs of easing. However, the KDI also analyzed that as of March, downward risks to the economy are expanding due to rising oil prices and global supply chain instability due to the Middle East war. For the month of March, the spike in prices at gas stations drove consumer prices up 2.2%, slightly higher than the 2% in February. While inflation remains close to the 2% target, the KDI warned that upward pressure could build further as the impact of rising oil prices is gradually reflected in inflation, which may act as a negative factor for future consumption. Exports are also at risk of facing worsening conditions amid a potential slowdown in external demand due to the Middle East war. 이은진, Arirang News.
Samsung Electronics said Tuesday that its first quarter operating profit will likely top 50 trillion Korean won for the very first time, driven by strong AI-driven memory chip demand. Lee Soo-jin has the details.
Samsung Electronics' first quarter profit beat its total for all of last year. The company announced quarter one profits of 57.2 trillion Korean won, or approximately $37.9 billion. This sets a new record for the highest quarterly operating profit in the company's history. According to the company's preliminary earnings report released Tuesday, the operating profit is a 755% surge compared to the same period in 2025. Sales reached 133 trillion won, or roughly $88.1 billion. That represents a 68% increase on year. This follows a record-breaking fourth quarter of 2025, which saw 20.1 trillion won in profit. With just the first quarter results of 2026, Samsung is already nearing its highest ever annual operating profit of 58.89 trillion won recorded during the semiconductor supercycle in 2018. While market analysis had widely expected a strong performance, the record-breaking figures even outpaced initial forecasts. This historic performance is underpinned by a semiconductor superboom. The primary driver is the explosive global demand for AI computing, which caused DRAM and NAND prices to surge by approximately 90% compared to the previous quarter. Securities analysis estimate that the semiconductor division's operating profit alone exceeded 50 trillion won, essentially driving the entire company's earnings. Specifically, they estimate that DRAM alone recorded over 41 trillion won in operating profit. Samsung's mobile and smartphone divisions also contribute to the bottom line, bolstered by the recent launch of Samsung's flagship AI-integrated handset series earlier this year. The finalized and fully audited financial results, including specific divisional performances, will be disclosed later this month following board approval. Lee Soo-jin, Arirang News.
And now, while we await that disclosure, our economics correspondent Kim Do-yeon reached out to pundits for their thoughts on Samsung's latest performance and the prospects ahead. Do take a listen.
Samsung Electronics' record-breaking first quarter performance has propelled the company into the global top 5 for tech sector profits, which includes Apple, Microsoft, and Alphabet. With memory chip prices climbing and sales heavily booked following February's rollout of next-generation HBM4 chips, financial experts are revising annual forecasts upward.
We also expect memory semiconductor prices to continue rising significantly in the second quarter, so this year's expected operating profit will likely exceed our previous estimates by a wide margin. We had projected an operating profit of around 240 trillion won, but we now expect it to reach even higher. I can tell you that the valuation merit is quite substantial.
The structural demand for AI infrastructure remains robust. Recently, the emergence of highly efficient software technologies such as TurboQuant sparked market concerns that major memory chip makers like Samsung and SK hynix might struggle as overall hardware requirements decrease. However, experts note that this efficiency actually accelerates broader market expansion.
To summarize, software technologies that utilize less memory, such as Google's, allow software companies to use less memory while accelerating the growth of their inference business. This has the effect of allowing more companies to enter the market. Consequently, that means even more memory will be needed.
While the demand outlook remains exceptionally strong, the industry is also closely monitoring external geopolitical risks. However, Middle East tensions currently pose minimal threat to immediate operations despite the sector's reliance on regional materials like helium and LNG. Domestic chip makers have secured a 6-month stockpile, meaning broader macroeconomic fallout would be a much greater concern than chip production if Operation Epic Fury prolongs.
If the situation prolongs, semiconductor production itself won't be the issue. Rather, all industries that demand semiconductors will experience considerable difficulties. In that scenario, even if we manufacture the chips, there may be nowhere to sell them.
Furthermore, the weakened Korean won against the US dollar continues to bolster Samsung's earnings, providing a highly favorable environment for major exporters. With this currency trend expected to persist, the company's profitability is positioned for further growth. Kim Do-yeon, Arirang News.
Seoul's historic landmarks are coming to life this spring with the return of the K-Royal Culture Festival. Running from April 25th to May 3rd, the event celebrates the rich history of the Joseon Dynasty and the Korean Empire. Festivities will take place across the capital's major cultural heritage sites, including the 5 grand palaces, Gyeongbokgung, Changdeokgung, Deoksugung, Changgyeonggung, and Gyeongigung, as well as the Jongmyo Shrine. Under the theme Palaces Awakening the Arts, visitors can enjoy a wide range of traditional performances, interactive royal lifestyle experiences, and special nighttime events. Now, programs for international visitors can be booked through a Korea Trip.
We had a bit of a cold snap today. Temperatures were near freezing this morning, and with the wind, it felt even colder. It'll stay on the chilly side tomorrow as well. Morning temperatures will be around 0 in inland areas, with big day-to-night temperature swings of over 15 degrees. And we could also see some frost inland. Meanwhile, air quality will be pretty good tomorrow thanks to better air circulation. In parts of the central and western regions, dust levels could tick up a bit in the morning and again at night as the air gets a little stagnant. But things should clear out in the afternoon. Tomorrow, Seoul will start the day at 3 degrees Celsius, Chuncheon at 0 degrees, Busan at 5 degrees. Then by the afternoon, Seoul will get up to 15 degrees, Chuncheon at 16 degrees, Busan at 15 degrees. Looking ahead, we've got more rain on the way from Thursday into Friday. Once the rain clears, it'll warm up again. But with these ups and downs in the weather, make sure to take care of yourself. Now here's a look at the weather around the world.
That is all we have for tonight. I'm Kim Da-mi. From all of us here at Arirang, thanks for watching and good night.
How to survive in Korea. Barbecue restaurants. Step 1. Taking care of your clothes. Put your jacket in the plastic bag. Seal it tight. If the stool flips open, store your clothes inside. Wearing light colors? Grab an apron. It's the best defense against oil splatter and smoke. Step 2. Bottomless side dishes. Basic side dishes at a barbecue restaurant. Eat, and eat as much as you want. Side dishes come with free refills. Oh, and if you don't see this sign, just ask, 사장님, 여기 밑반찬 좀 더 주세요. Simple, isn't it? Step 3. Grilling meat. There are various kinds of samgyeopsal in Korea. Place the meat on the grill. Turn it over when golden. And again when it looks done. Again and again and again. Step 4. Sam style. You aren't taking bites of sam like a taco, are you? In Korea, we have it in one bite. A pro tip here, add only as much as you can handle in a bite. Gotta avoid awkward situations. Step 5. Enjoy the perks. After the meal, enjoy the perks offered as a Korean restaurant. Fabric refreshers get rid of the barbecue smell, while mint candies freshen your breath. Did you survive the barbecue restaurant? Hang on. Are you here with someone you want to impress? Then let's skip the garlic. Who knows what will happen?
Knock knock! The magical door to the world of K-animation is swinging wide open. Meet your instant new BFF, the adorable Catch. Tina Ping will have you hooked from the very first glance. Need a hand? Our Robocar Pony Rescue team is always zooming in to save the day. How about tagging along on Pinkfong and Pal's super exciting quest to reclaim their lost magic? With the mysterious life forms Cabion by your side, you can become a Cabion master and save humanity like the total hero. Protecting children's innocence while igniting their boundless imaginations. That's the magic of Korean animation. K-animation, the ultimate bestie for kids worldwide.
Welcome to Within the Frame, where we bring the most pressing issues across the globe into focus. I'm Kim Mo-gen. South Korea is stepping up its response as the Middle East conflict continues to shake global energy markets. The government has raised its resource security alert for crude oil from caution to warning, citing supply disruptions and rising oil price volatility. With shipping through the Strait of Hormuz still constrained, refiners are scrambling to secure alternative crude supplies. To stabilize domestic supply, the government has introduced a strategic petroleum reserve swap system, allowing refiners to temporarily use state stockpiles while replaced cargo is secured. Now, authorities are also tightening energy demand management, including a two-day vehicle rotation system for public institutions. So how serious is this current energy security situation for South Korea, and will these measures be enough to manage the risks ahead? For more on this, we are joined in the studio by Sung-Soo Eric Kim, founder and CEO of DataCrunch Global and adjunct professor at Yonsei Graduate School of Business. Thank you for joining us, Professor Kim.
Thank you for having me tonight.
And also joining us online is Song Soo-young, professor of business and economics at Chungang University. Good to see you, Professor Song.
Yeah, thank you for having me.
So let's start a discussion first with Professor Song. The government, like I've said, has raised the resource security alert for crude oil from caution to warning. Tell us, how serious is this current energy situation for South Korea?
Since the outbreak of the U.S.-Israel war against Iran, actually, the escalation of the war has made the Strait of Hormuz effectively shut off, and that could have shown there's some ripple effect all around the world, particularly the East Asia, including China and South Korea and Japan, has mostly relied upon the imports from the crude oils from Middle East. As a result, the situation is cannot be worse than as anticipated. So I believe that we have prepared for this situation, and so we have operated some 9 stockpile reserve place around the world. And in March only, our government has distributed some 22.46 million barrels to stabilize the oil price. However, we have altogether 190 million barrels. So this implies that we have over 2 months buffer against some oil shortage or the increased price. So to maintain the economy to work properly and as normal as possible, but still, unless without enough replenishment for the supply the oil, our economy could be subject to some serious situation. As a result, the government they decided to raise some level of concern over the oil crisis situation from warning from the caution and the concerns to the warning situation. So that is a very appropriate action and step to guard against the potential problems to come up in the future. So anyway, I believe that our government has capacity to deal with the current situation and very agile and very cautious and very careful about how to maneuver this difficult situation.
So the government really has come up with swift measures, and it seems it sees the situation as more than just a temporary situation. Now, looking at the situation back, zooming out, Professor Kim, President Trump, he set a final deadline for Iran to accept the deal, and the conflict, it appears to be entering a quite decisive phase we're seeing. How do you think the next stage of this conflict would affect the oil markets and the supply stability as well?
I think we have to first understand why Trump has conducted the operation at Venezuela, then why Trump is going to war at Iran. I think we could look into what happened in 1974 when United States had an agreement with Saudi Arabia to control the oil market and also to have US dollar as the dominant currency, which we call a petrodollar agreement. Venezuela and Iran operation is conducted because U.S. is losing power against OPEC. They're losing power against controlling the oil price, and also because BRICS announced that they will accept petro yuan. So Trump has a lot of discussion to do with Xi Jinping next month. So that's the reason why Trump is conducting these operations in Venezuela and Iran prior to the discussion with Xi Jinping. So I don't think that this war is going to end without a concrete, result from Trump's side. So we can outlook that this war will sustain for some time, even if United States withdraw from this war. There's going to be continuous escalating conflicts in the Middle East, which will impact the global oil market and global economy. So we will see some, earthquakes, remaining from the Iran war, even after U.S. Withdrawals from Middle East.
So it will definitely deal a big blow to the oil markets globally. Now, in fact, we're already seeing prices move higher with WTI crude climbing above $100 a barrel. Professor Song, how concerned do you think we should be about further price volatility?
At first, I do not want to make a fuss, but today, Western Texas Intermediate crude future price has climbed the level to 115 barrels per today. But however, this is a little bit slightly lower than several years ago, 3 years ago, when the Russia and the Ukraine war occurs. The Brent crude oil future has reached $118. So, to that regard, clearly the steep increase of price matters and cause a serious problem around the world, particularly for East Asian countries. But this level of per barrel price of the oil price could be borne or by our economy. Considering, as the Professor Kim has mentioned, the 1974 issues, at that time when the OPEC has reduced the supply of the crude oil to the world, and then it has reverberated to the level of almost 2,000 percentage increase of oil price. That's why it had so much impact on the economy, and it occurs twice in 1970s. In comparison with that, today's and these days effect of the oil price has been a little bit alleviated and mitigated and less than what it used to be. Of course, the reason is the world economy and has reduced the reliance of some fossil fuels, and energy mix has been changed. Of course, our Korea has also changed and tried to adjust the energy mix and reduce the reliance of the crude oil, but it is still very essential and is imperative for South Korean economy to import crude oils to make and produce some plastic and such as oil-related products, also for the transportation. So to that regard, it's very crucial for our economy. However, the war continues. It's totally up to the United States and Iran and Israel. But as Professor Kim pointed out clearly, that this war cannot easily be ceased, even though United States withdraw. Israel has the incentive to continue the war, and also Iran. Not only they have to recover their sovereignty and to protect themselves, they continue the war until all these kind of tussles and problems has been settled and clearly. So to that regards, this war cannot stop easily. To that regard, we can say this crisis may continue more or less with some escalated, rather than even though at this escalated level, the war situation could continue. So that is going to be a burden to our economy.
Right. That's why many of us are really concerned about this prolonging situation indeed. Now, in order to deal with that, the South Korean government, it has introduced several measures, including a strategic petroleum reserve swap system. Professor Kim, how effective do you think this system could be in, stabilizing crude supply?
So I think the government is saying that our government is going to supply about 20 million oil in reserve. Because if you calculate how much we're short, 7 ships are held in Hormuz right now, which accounts for about 14 million. So in a simple, mathematics calculation, if the government, swaps 20 million, then the government is thinking that the demand will be met. I mean, the supply will be met. But the condition is for refineries, our refineries, to find an alternative source of oil, which can be United States or Kazakhstan, like our cabinet is visiting Kazakhstan right now, Oman and Saudi Arabia to find alternative sources. But even if refineries find alternative sources, it takes time to actually contract and ship it back to Korea. So it's a lead time issue. Government is projecting that at least with the 20 million reserve, Korea can sustain about 5 to 6 months. But we need a more rapid government support to actually close those alternative contracts and ship those alternative oil to Korea so that refineries can use it. Currently, our refineries, I think, have about 2 months of a reserve. So we still have time, but it all depends on industry-government collaboration at this stage.
Mm-hmm. Then, like we've touched upon, South Korea, it has already identified alternative crude from regions like the U.S., Africa, and Australia. Professor Song, how quickly can these supplies realistically replace disrupted Middle East imports?
Actually, when you go into details, it needs some kind of adjustment of equipment when we change the import oils from Middle East to other countries, because the quality and the contents, ingredients of the crude oil could differ from according to the different areas. Therefore, it needs time, but we have, as Professor Kim has mentioned earlier, that we have a 2 months buffer. So it means that even though we have supplied some necessary crude oils to produce some refined petroleums and diesel oils and other necessary plastic products, then we need to find replenish and some further supply to fill up some vacant stockpile or storage of our oil reserve. Otherwise, our economy will stop. So 2 months is a relatively long period, but still we need to make sure that the supply is guaranteed. So to that regards, this effort needs to be continued and pursued by the government until every current war situation in Middle East has been cleared out. Even after that, the ceasefire or truce accomplished in Middle East areas, we still need diversify the supply source, because we have depended too much on the Middle East through the Strait of Hormuz. So this revealed some kind of risk for our energy mix. So that's why we need to continue our efforts to find alternative areas and flexible enough equipment to be prepared to refine the crude oils.
Right, that would be very important, especially in this very uncertain global environment. Now, going back to the government's efforts, Professor Kim, South Korean government also introduced this odd, even number vehicle rotation system for public institutions starting tomorrow, and also Arirang TV, we also will follow that rule. How much impact do you think could these measures realistically have on oil consumption?
So if you look at the forecasts from the Ministry of Climate on how much it will have an effect on oil consumption reduction, they're focusing about 17,000 to 68,000 barrels monthly. But our daily oil consumption itself is 2.8 million barrels. So we can say that the reduction effect might not be that significant. But I think it's very important for the government to show that this is a very crisis situation, very important crisis situation. So the government is trying to control the situation, and we are introducing precautionary measures to prevent a greater crisis. So the signaling effect, I think it's very important that the government is giving a message to the public that this is a crisis situation. So we all have to work together to navigate through the situation because, as Professor Song said, there's more risk that might come in the coming weeks and months. So it's always good to have the government, give warnings to the public.
It would definitely be helpful in raising public awareness as well. Now, at the same time, the government is also reviewing broader energy supply options, including nuclear and coal generation. Professor Song, how important do you think will maintaining a stable power supply be during this uncertain energy crisis situation?
Currently, the full operation of the nuclear power plant and renewal or rework of some coal power plant should be some temporary step to take care of some emergency situation like this. When we considered some energy mix of our South Korean economy, the supply of the total energy supply is consisted with coal and some oil and oil products and natural gas. And in that, among them, the electricity generation is usually produced by the coal, 32%, and the natural gas, 25%, and the nuclear, 7%. So oil is not much used at all, almost just 1.1% of the electricity generation. So this implies that oil is imported to produce some other oil products such as refined oil, refined petroleum diesel, and the naphtha, and the other things, plastics. So to that regards, the industry is the biggest client of the oil consumption. So transportation also has taken a huge chunk of the consumption of the oil. However, still it has a direct impact on some daily life, people's daily life. So this makes the government, our country, in the very trade-off relationship or very delicate position, narrow reach of maneuvering this current situation is, because the best way is not falling into the recession, but do not provoke some kind of some inflationary pressure over the economy. That is going to be a burden to the economy. So to that regards, our government needs to balance the approach for the oil control and oil price control. So to that regards, I would rather say the necessary government policy should be not just let the market decide the price and the oil price to go up. As a result, if the economy is going into the recession, the cost is much bigger than the benefit. To that regard, I'd rather choose rationing of the oil supply, oil distribution among the industry, but maintaining the industry capacity is very important as well.
A very important point to conclude our discussion tonight. Thank you so much for your insights, Professor Song.
My pleasure.
And of course, Professor Kim, we really appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
And that'll be all from us on Within the Frame. Be sure to tune in again next time as we continue to explore the stories that matter. Until then, stay informed and engaged.
Thank you.